regular Sunday evening lecture series. And this evening, we are very, very happy to have Professor Ron Epstein as our speaker. And I think everyone knows Ron. He is the founding chancellor of the RBU. And now, of course, he is emeritus and professor emeritus as well. But he's also the trustee of the Dhammaram Buddhist University. And previously, he taught at several universities. And but most importantly, he has written many, many articles about applying Buddhism to our daily life. His latest book on responsible living is very, very well received, which applies the Buddhist principle to all walks of life. And this evening, we are very, very happy to have him to talk about a very interesting topic. And the title of his talk is Does Coronaviruses Have Buddha Nature? And other Buddhist queries about the high-tech world that we're in now. So, and he has been exploring this topic for decades. And so we're very, very happy and fortunate to have Ron to be our main speaker this evening. Our translator is Michael Liu, again, one of our outstanding translators for this evening. So I think what we'll do is Ron will talk for about 40 minutes, and then we have Q&A with the audience. So without further ado, Ron, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Ray, for your kind introduction. If you feel like something needs to be said before 40 minutes are up, please don't hesitate. Any time is fine as far as I'm concerned. Particularly because I'll have to beg the indulgence of the audience this evening, because what I'm going to be talking about is really new to me, and I'm not completely clear-headed about it myself. So it may be a little rough going in places, and so please be patient with me. And when it's time for discussion, please feel free to say whatever's on your mind, and I'll be happy to receive it regardless of what you have to say. So, I'd like to thank all of the people who are involved. And it's amazing how complicated it is for just a simple talk on Sunday evening. And I'd really like to express my appreciation to all the people who have made this possible so far. I think it's really incredible to me that modern technology has allowed people from all over the globe to come and listen and participate in the conversation. So even though I'm doing some critique of technology, I'm also at the same time kind of in awe of it. My getting involved in the topic this evening about coronaviruses and the Buddha nature really comes from my extremely frustrating experience, which I think may be true of all of you, in terms of COVID-19 and its variants, and trying to live a more or less normal life in the middle of all kinds of social bubbles, which has led to a lot of strain on everyone, and there seems to be no end in sight as far as I can tell. I'd also like to be very clear that I really don't have the credentials to be talking about what I'm talking about. And so for those of you who are listening in who do have the credentials, don't be polite. If I make elementary mistakes in genetics or biology or whatever, please let me know. You know, I studied biology when I was in college, which is maybe 60 years ago. And even though my professor was a Nobel Prize winner, you know, even he would be hopelessly out of date by now. So I'm just kind of winging it as far as the technology of some of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about. So one of the things that directed me in the direction that led us to this evening is the lack of harmonious, compassionate discourse between the two poles of advocates of the vaccines and the other pole being the anti-vaxxers. And it seemed to me, just without spending a lot of time on this, that it just doesn't seem to be working out in terms of the kind of discussion that our society needs to have about not only about the viruses and vaccines, but about the role of technology itself in our society. And so as I've thought about this topic more and more, I've come to feel that there isn't any easy, facile solution to the problems that face us about technology and vaccines and so on in our society. That a few centuries ago, I think, at least in the West, I don't know about in China, but in the West, a few centuries ago, it seems to me that we took a very wrong turn, and we have to go back to where we took that wrong turn and have a frank discussion about the basic presuppositions of our thinking. And so one of the, well, why is this? I think I don't really need to say this, but in those few centuries, science and technology have brought us from the most amazing discoveries and abilities to the point where, despite that, we're making the planet itself uninhabitable. And if we don't do an about face pretty quickly, then we will be the casualties, and the planet will do just fine without us. So where can we start? I thought one of the places that would be good is in our understanding of what is real and how things work. And from the point of view of technology, you could say that we have built ourselves a framework of understanding that is both horizontal in its knowledge and vertical in its knowledge. That, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a moment. And that this framework has to do with the polarity of knowledge between scientism, that is not science as the scientific method, but science as a materialist outlook, materialist philosophy, and evangelical Christianity, or so-called born-again Christianity, and Mahayana Buddhism, and Taoism, and the teachings of Plato and Aristotle. So what I mean by horizontal knowledge and vertical knowledge is that although we have this incredible knowledge of how to do things with modern technology, that knowledge is a very thin veneer that goes on indefinitely, infinitely even, in the horizontal 10 directions, you might say. And that knowledge is, although it's almost unlimited on the horizontal direction, in other directions, going up or down in terms of our experience, it's very limited and needs to be developed. So what we're talking about basically are levels of consciousness going from lower awareness to higher awareness in terms of the vertical directions. And there are various ways in terms of how this manifests in our thinking. And let me just mention a couple so you'll have a better idea of what I'm talking about here. In the European tradition, in the period of classical thought and roughly the last 500 or so years, there's been a notion called the great chain of being. And that means that all living beings are not equal. That would be in the horizontal direction, but are but go like this. At the top, you have God, and everybody under God is supposed to be supporting God. And after God, then you have the angels. And then after the angels, you have the various classes of human beings, from the rulers to slave classes. And then there's, as you go down, there's also a sense of animals that are there to support all the kinds of beings above them, okay? So this is one aspect of using this horizontal and vertical kind of model. In Buddhism, we also have a hierarchical sense of experience. For example, we have the 4 dhyanas or the 4 jhanas, and above that we have the 8 formless samadhis, and above that we have the realms of the arhats and the bodhisattvas and ultimately the Buddhas. Okay, in the Buddhist model, these are all woven together in terms of interconnection and interdependency of all life on a cosmic scale. We find this, I think, very clearly in the Buddhist Huayan school, and also in the sense of what Chinese Buddhists call panjiao, which I like to translate as ranking the teachings. So some teachings are higher than other teachings in terms of the direct experience that you get, depending on the level that you have attained. And in terms of the Panjiao, the teachings of the Abhidhamsaka school and the Lotus school are at the top of the vertical measure. to give you the other, one of the things that I want to mention now, because it will be helpful later, is that there is a component from, for example, the Buddhist and other Asian philosophical points of view that is very strong in their teachings and is very weak in the teachings of Western philosophy. And that has to do with the direction and focus of the attention. Yeah. And how we learn to focus our attention in such a way that we are able to go up in the vertical direction in terms of our spiritual journey. So as we go up from the horizontal default, then we tend to see the world of our experience differently. You know, it's not static. It keeps on changing. And we do also have this teaching in the West. I thought I might introduce you to Plato's Republic. In book 7, Plato introduces an analogy of the cave. And what in Plato's writing, he writes about Socrates teaching a student of his, whose name is Glaucon, okay? So let me just read you a little bit of the description of the analogy of the cave from Plato's Republic, book 7. Imagine human beings living in an underground cave-like dwelling with an entrance a long way up that is open to the light and as wide as the cave itself. They have been there since childhood with their necks and legs fettered so that they are fixed in the same place, able to see only in front of them because their fetters prevent them from turning their heads around. Light is provided by a fire burning far above and behind them. Between the prisoners and the fire, there is an elevated road stretching. Imagine that along this road, a low wall has been built, like the screen in front of people that is provided by puppeteers, and above which they show their puppets. Socrates continues, also imagine then that there are people alongside the wall carrying multifarious artifacts that project above it, statues of people, other animals made of stone and wood, every material, and as you would expect, some of the carriers are talking and some are silent. And Socrates continues, they are like us. I mean, in the first place, do you think the prisoners have ever seen anything of themselves and one another besides the shadows that the fire casts on the wall of the cave in front of them? Let me repeat that. Socrates says, do you think these prisoners have ever seen anything of themselves and one another beside the shadows that the fire casts on the wall of the cave in front of them? And his student Glaucon says, how could they if they have to keep their heads motionless throughout life? And Socrates says, what about the things carried along the wall? Isn't it the same true for where they are concerned? And yes. And if they could engage in discussion with one another, don't you think they could assume the words they use and apply to things they see passing in front of them? And the student says, they would have to. Almost finished here. Socrates says, what if their prison also had an echo from the wall facing them? When one of the carriers passing along the wall spoke, do you think they would believe that anything other than the shadow passing in front of them was speaking? The student says, I do not. And Socrates says, all in all then, what the prisoners would take for true reality is nothing other than the shadows of these artifacts. Okay, and the student says that's entirely inevitable. So basically, what Socrates is saying is that we are like the prisoners in the cave who are tied down with our heads in one direction to watch the flickering shadows on the wall in front of us. And since that's all we know, we assume that that is the extent of reality. And the person who is able to escape from the cave and climb out into the light and see the sun in the sky is the sage who is ridiculed because when he sees what reality is actually like, nobody believes him. So I think that this very famous analogy of our ordinary experience just being like flickering shadows on the wall of the cave is a very powerful one, and it has applicability for a wide range of inquiries. So I'd like you to keep that in mind in terms of how we now, with high-tech substitutes for a fire in the cave and so on and so forth, are basically in the same situation that Socrates is explaining, that we're all prisoners trying to interpret shadows, and in that sense, to the extent that we are doing that, we are bound to be unsuccessful as long as we hold to the presupposition that reality is to be found on the shadows of the wall instead of to the opening of the cave. Okay. So that's one restriction of our experience. And I think a lot of what we have to talk about on the fundamental level has to do with how, to the extent to which our experience of ourselves and the world outside are restricted and distorted, and that we really cannot make spiritual progress either for ourselves as a society until we realize that all the technology, which seems to be wonderful, is just sophisticated versions of shadows on the wall of the cave, and that we have to look elsewhere if we're going to find any sense of understanding and truth in our experience. Now I'd like to very, very briefly introduce you to another analogical story, which many of you may be very familiar with, and it's a very profound one, and comes from the Zhuangzi, which is the one of the main texts of the Chinese Taoist tradition, and it's really quite remarkable. This is from Book 1 of the Zhuangzi, and this is a teaching about scale, not only direction. Are we going up? Or are we going down? Or are we going horizontal? But the scale in which the universe exists and the extent to which we are able to comprehend what is actually going on in the world in which we live, or is it the case that it's really beyond our ability to really deeply understand because of the nature of what we are experiencing? So let me just read you a little bit of this, and then we'll go on to other things. In the northern darkness, there is a fish, and his name is Kun. Kun is so huge, I don't know how many thousand li he measures. He changes and becomes a bird whose name is Peng. This is known in Buddhism as the great golden-winged Peng bird, or Garuda. The back of the Peng measures, I don't know how many thousand li across. And when that bird rises up and flies off, his wings are like clouds all over the sky. When the sea begins to move, this bird sets off for the southern darkness, which is the lake of heaven. The Universal Harmony, that's the name of another Taoist text, records various wonders. And it says, when the Peng journeys to the southern darkness, the waters are roiled for 3,000 li. He beats the whirlwind and rises 90,000 li, setting off a 6-month gale. Wavering heat, bits of dust, living things blowing each other about. The sky looks very blue. Is that its real color, or is it because it's so far away? The sky is so far away and has no end. When the bird looks down, all he sees is blue too. And then a little farther along, Zhuangzi continues, if the wind is not piled up deep enough, it won't have strength to bear up great wings. Therefore, when the Peng rises 90,000 li, he must have the wind under him like that. Only then can he mount on the back of the wind, shoulder the blue sky, and nothing can hinder or block him. Only then can he set his eyes on the south. So it talks about the great Peng bird is so immense and so powerful. After beating the whirlwind, he leaps into the air and rises up 90,000 li, cutting through the clouds and mist, shouldering the blue sky. And then he turns his eyes south and prepares to journey to the southern darkness. Okay. The little quail, the bird, the quail, laughs at him saying, where does he think he's going? I give a great leap and fly up, but I never get more than 10 or 12 yards before I come down fluttering amongst the weeds and brambles. And that's the best kind of flying anyway. Where does he think he's going? Such is the difference between big and little. So this is an analogy to compare our petty concerns to the little birds and insects and so on, compared to this inconceivably large and powerful and great bird, the spiritual bird, the great golden-winged Peng bird. Okay. So one of the things that I wanted to mention to you this evening has to do with a bat cave. I don't remember, maybe somebody can tell me, was it in China or Southeast Asia, the famous bat cave? Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Maybe I'll have to explain myself here. There was a controversy with COVID-19, which is still going on, about whether it was created in a lab in Wuhan, or whether it was naturally transmitted from a bat in a cave full of bats somewhere, I think in Southeast Asia, but I don't remember. And I've read several accounts, since this controversy is still broiling, about the cave and versions of what actually happened. So as far as I remember, there were multiple researchers, many of them from laboratories all over the world, studying these bats and the viruses associated with them. And one of them was a very famous researcher from Wuhan in China. I don't want to concern myself with the controversy and who's right and who's wrong. But I just want to share with you some of my feelings when I first read about this situation. And the account that I read said that the researchers who went to this cave to bring back samples did so because they wanted to see how those viruses that were associated with the bats in the cave could be used in terms of the research that was being done at the research facilities that were involved with this. So they went and took samples from the bats and the viruses associated with them. And what was shocking to me was that, and this may not be fair, that at least according to the account, they had very little or no concern for how they were interfering with the vast and complex and ancient ecosystem of the cave in which the bats and various other sentient beings had been living for an incredibly long time. So the fact that they were causing this disruption without feeling that that they had any obligation to the sentient beings or non-sentient living beings who were inhabiting that place, and that the complications and its possible value, not complication, the ecosystem of the cave, from my perspective, has intrinsic value in itself, and not only instrumental value. It's not only there so that we can use it for whatever purposes that we want, but that we need to respect what we do not need from that cave and do not understand from that cave, and move in such a way that does minimal disruption to the ecosystem of the cave. So I thought that this was a good example of a very important difference of opinion that people have when they're discussing these sorts of things, and that this distinction for us Buddhists is a very, very important one, and goes not only for bats and viruses, but also for people and inconceivable ecological universes that we trample through every day without a thought. That, again, so that we need to honor the intrinsic worth of not only human beings, which we very rarely do, but we also need to realize that that's the case for other sentient beings, and not only for sentient beings, but for the environments, the ecosystems which they need for their survival, that we are destroying planet-wide on an incredibly fast rate. There are a couple of other things that I want to talk about. Not only does this narrow-minded concern for special advantages to human beings have to do with the conflict between ourselves and the environment, but this kind of research goes on for all kinds of reasons, from very altruistic to very selfish and concerned with one's own welfare and wealth, and military concerns. You have a whole broad range of stuff that goes on, and some of it is pretty bizarre. Just for an example, one of the areas of research that I've been reading about lately are things called brain organoids. Brain organoids. And these are mini brains, you could say, that are developed in the lab from stem cells, and then begin to start functioning on their own, and then can be transplanted into the brain of an animal, or ultimately, probably not too soon if they haven't done it already, into human brains. And so this is going on, this kind of research with these organoids of various kinds are very widespread in the world today. And there were some researchers that I read about recently who were doing brain organoid research, and got very disturbed when they realized that they were getting electric currents from the interaction of the brain organoids with the brain of the animal or the human that were very much not yet human, but with the animal, that were very much like the brain patterns, electrical patterns of premature human babies. So then a lot of questions arise, starting with, is this an ethical thing to do? And what does this mean? Does this mean that they are becoming human? And does this mean, is this the first step in our building a new race of human beings in the lab? These are questions that I certainly can't answer. In terms of what I want to talk about still tonight, is this electrical currents in the brain. And this is very often interpreted by researchers as meaning that the brain or the brain organoid is becoming conscious. And I think that leads us to another area that I would just like to very briefly tell you about, in case you don't know about it already. I don't want to say too much because I'd like to leave some time for discussion, as Dr. Yeh mentioned. But it seems to me that one of the distinctions that would be very helpful to us, well, two distinctions would be very helpful to us in sorting through some of these very sticky problems that have to do with fundamental presuppositions. And one of them is we could call it data versus consciousness, okay? That one of the ways of explaining our experiences is that we can explain it in terms of its being data, or we can explain it as in terms of its being consciousness. We don't know whether we can really mix the two together very successfully. When we explain everything as data, then there is no place, I claim, and this is maybe a radical claim, that there's no place for consciousness. In other words, the world of data is a world without the distinctions of consciousness. And that means without the distinctions of the positive emotions, without the distinction of the kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And a lot of places where modern scientific research, particularly in this biogenetic world, runs into problems is because aspects of consciousness don't fit in the data world, and so they don't know what to do with consciousness altogether. Philosophically, I think there's consensus that philosophers have not cracked the nut of what is consciousness anyway. So, and I think the reason why that's still the case after so many decades is because it doesn't fit. This leads us to the other aspect of difficulty of dealing with our experience, and that is how does ethics fit in with science? Without spending a lot of time on this, I would like to suggest that as the English philosopher David Hume said many centuries ago, you have to distinguish between is and ought, so that science has to do with what exists in the physical world, and has nothing to do with ethical or non-ethical choices about behavior. That has to do with the ought world. So we have the data world and the consciousness world and the is world and the ought world. Okay. So why don't, let me see.
Yeah, we need the time for question. Yeah.
Let me just say a little bit about, and maybe we can come back to it, but I did want to talk about something that probably most of you are more interested in this strange stuff that we've been talking about. And that has to do with Buddhist solutions to the problems of our not getting along because of our horizontal or vertical, et cetera, distinctions that we cannot agree on. And I think you all already know that intentional action or karma, which is motivated by respect for sentient life, is one basic way that Buddhism looks at these problems. Another aspect of this that you're all aware of is that Buddhists advocate for no untrue or hurtful speech, and straightforward mind, and the four Brahma Vihara, which loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, and the Bodhisattva vow. There are all these aspects of Buddhism that make up the foundation of how you use Buddhist teachings to deal with contemporary problems. So I'd just like to mention very briefly our teacher, the Venerable Master Xuan Hua, talked about pandemic-related practice and advised us not only to follow the precepts and to dwell in purity, but also to do great compassion mantra practice and to practice the 42 hands and eyes in addition to the Brahma Vihara or infinite mind practices that I just mentioned. And then I think a little more rarely in Buddhist circles, he also mentioned using the light from the Buddha eye, of the 5 eyes, the Buddha eye up here, to purify the air and waterborne toxins and presumably the toxic viruses of COVID-19 and its variants would be purified in this way also. I think to make that jump. He also said that we should use, and here maybe somebody can help me out, I don't know what the Chinese is, what got translated as electrotherapy to detoxify the air. What's electrotherapy? He said it means sitting in meditation and emitting a light of wisdom from our meditative state. This light of wisdom is a form of electricity. And when these waves of electricity pass through the air, they have the effect of detoxifying it. They transform the contaminated air. He also said that when we cultivate in the Chan Hall, we imperceptibly eradicate killing energy in the world so that we can get rid of the toxicities that direct our health and threaten our existence. So once again, I'd like to mention this practice that he talks about of using the light that comes forth from the Buddha eye, which is sometimes called the hair mark attribute, the light that comes out from the middle of the forehead. And that light shines out on the whole world and detoxifies and purifies our experience so that not even a trace of poison remains. So I think I better stop here and maybe we can, how much time do we have for question and answer?
About 10 minutes, but we can extend probably 15.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Warren. I think it's a wonderful talk touching us upon many topics of key interest. And let's see, there's a couple questions. One question is there consciousness? The other question is talking about your book about applying Buddhism to daily life, whether there's a Chinese translation, because the Chinese listeners where can they find it? I'm not sure your book has been translated into Chinese.
As far as I know, it hasn't been, but very often I'm the last person to know. People translate stuff that I've written. So, but whoever would like to do that, you're certainly welcome. As to what is consciousness, that's a very interesting question. I would say that consciousness is the way we distort and limit our experience. So, and to undistort and unlimit our experience, then we have to develop wisdom. So this is the transformation of consciousness into wisdom that we're talking about. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think your question, your talk are extremely interesting, cover a broad spectrum of things. And, but I'm wondering that from your point of view, when you talk about technology versus the Buddha's approach, can you view it something like from a technology point of view, we're still inherent in our the industrial revolution in terms of seeing everything as parts and trying to fix the parts rather than looking at the whole, all right, which is what you're talking about. Right? And so in that sense, by looking at the parts, we know that we have lost a lot. For example, even medicine, Western medicine now talk about precision medicine, which is looking at the whole, trying, or at least trying to look at the whole, whereas Chinese medicine really looking from the whole, then fix, to adjust the related issues. So in solving problems of the tough problem today, all right, like ecological problem that you mentioned about, how do we apply Buddha's thinking in terms of looking at whole, to look at from a holistic point of view, to tackle the problem rather than still looking at the part, because the ecology problem you cannot afford to only look at the part. You have any comments on that?
Yeah, they're all very good questions, Ray, and I wish my answers were as good as your questions here. With regard to the holistic view, I think that's ideal, but very difficult to do because it's just like we're the little grasshoppers and birds that are watching the great golden winged pung bird. That's it's inconceivable to us to see what's really involved, I think, very often. And we have, but I still think we have to do the best we can, and that one of the many possible approaches is that we can look historically, both consciously and historically, at the origins of Chinese medicine, of Ayurvedic Vedic medicine, of modern Western medicine, and see whether we can untangle what is good and helpful from what causes big problems down the road. I think one of the, and this is not out when I talk about untangle things, of course, from a Buddhist point of view, what we are all doing is trying to realize that these problems are internal, and that the entire cosmos fits inside. So if we're really going to be holistic about it. So there was one other thing that I wanted to say about what you mentioned, but it disappeared. So maybe it will come back. And did I answer your question, or is there a part of it?
Yeah, right. I mean, that's the overall. There's a couple questions here.
Okay.
Tom Brockwell. The question is, do you have any thoughts about the current lack of belief in science or in the world as it is?
Lack of belief in what?
In science.
In science?
Or in the world as it is. You see your chat, if you see your chat box.
I'm on an iPad, so it's very hard to me.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Chat box.
Well,
I have to apologize.
The question is from Tom Brockcher, Dr. Epstein. Do you have any thoughts about the current lack of belief in science or in the world as it is?
Or in the world?
Yeah, in the world as it is.
Yeah, I'm not anti-science. I should say that. Although, for example, with vaccination, I'm I have some, deep reservations about genetic engineering and its relation to the vaccines, and how people are looking at that in a very fundamental way, holistic way. But I'm fully vaccinated and boosted, and but I don't think that the medicine of vaccination, where a doctor friend once said to me that that's the greatest achievement of 20th century, 21st century medicine is our vaccines. This was, maybe 10 years ago. But I think this is another aspect of the polarity that gets us nowhere, rather than the holistic view that Ray is talking about. So I don't think it's a matter of either or, but more both and, that I don't think we should abandon science, and I don't think that we should make a religion out of it either. The Venerable Master Xuanhua used to say that it wasn't that Buddhism was right and science was wrong, and that we should abandon science. We should just realize that in a lot of areas where we don't understand what's going on, it isn't because these are areas beyond science, but they're areas that science hasn't gotten to yet. And so things that seem bizarre and unbelievable today might be mainstream science that we are all participating in tomorrow. So I think that, again, I can't say this too often, that I think the main problem with science today is it's although there are plenty of ethical people who are wonderful people and scientists, that science itself has a problem with inadequate ethics, and that the people who are very ethical within the scientific establishment are people who got their ethics someplace else. So, for example, among the disciples of Master Xuanhua, I've met some really remarkable scientists, but they get their ethics from Buddhism, not because you can't really. Science is not about that, and this has adversely affected the major corporations in Silicon Valley. If we had more time, I could tell you about my learning of young scientists in Silicon Valley, young programmers, etc., being disillusioned in their quest for more ethical standards in their jobs. So that's a whole other can of worms.
Yeah, that's another totally. But on the other hand, though, you see, if you look at the complex problem like ecology, things like that, you are very right in terms of when we tackle a big problem, we have to put responsibility right in the middle of it. When you try to solve my personal problem, I'm responsible for that problem. But if I'm part of the team to tackle the ecology problem, then the responsibility is not just me. All right. All right. We are responsible for a much bigger community. All right. So that's the kind of thing that in problem solving, I think that element needs to be brought in to for each problem to be solved is what's our responsibility as a part of the solution. It's not the technical solution only. Here's another question. Dr. Al, let's see. This is Su Wang. If that's the case, then the brain created has no consciousness, as it has not undergone any experience. Is this right? But when we are born, would possess consciousness. That's our eighth consciousness. Two questions.
I didn't get the first part.
Okay, well, answer the second part. I tell you the first
Okay.
part.
Okay, when we are born, what happens? You have to go back to the previous life, and then the 8 consciousnesses collapse into a single unified consciousness, which then leaves the body and goes off to rebirth. And after it is reborn, then it, because it is embodied, then it gradually differentiates into the eight consciousnesses. Again, the 1 becomes 8. So the 8 becomes 1, and the 1 becomes 8, if that's clear. I could go into that further if there's a question. Yeah. And this first part, could you give a crack at that?
The first part is that if this the case, then the brain created has, let's see, if this is the case, then the brain created has no consciousness, as it has not undergone any experience. Is this right?
Not from a Buddhist point of view.
Okay.
From a Buddhist point of view, for example, from the Wei Shizong, the Yogacara school, we sorry. What is real is consciousness, but the problem with saying that consciousness is real is that our consciousness as we experience it is both limited and distorted. But that's all there is, according to Buddhist teachings. And as I mentioned before, then practice becomes becoming aware of these 8 consciousnesses and how they function intentionally to create karma. Okay. And then what we want to do is to create more and more good karma and stop creating, bad karma. And so the consciousness only school talks about how each one of the 8 consciousnesses in the process of self-cultivation gets transformed into what is called wisdom. So, or you could call wisdom consciousness if you want. And that's direct, clear, undistorted, pristine, brilliant light, however you want to describe what that wisdom, compassion, mind, awakening is like. Inconceivable.
Okay, well, here's another question that says, in your book, Responsible Living, I read a story that one person's soul could become thousands of mosquitoes. Seems like in rebirth, a person in this life and another life is not one-to-one linear relationship. Is that right?
This is a really good question, and I'm not sure that I have an authoritative answer. So I be warned that my answer might be flawed, but my understanding is that that's one of the reasons why we have to really cherish human birth, because, for example, if we lose our human birth because of our karmic activity in this life, in this world, we may not have enough, I don't know what you call it, ling qi, enough energy to get reborn as a human being. We might get reborn, say, as a litter of puppies, and then if one, if you have a litter of 6 puppies, say, if one puppy, if you get reborn as, 6 of them, then it's pretty hard to get them back together again. And it's much easier for things to slide in the other direction, being in a situation where you don't have the necessary prerequisites for birth as a human being.
Well, thank you. I don't know whether we have any more questions from audience, but I want to share with you terminology I learned from Dr. Chen Yu. I don't know whether she's on. She mentioned to me 2 notions of AI. One is artificial intelligence. The other is awareness intelligence. I thought that's really wonderful. And I saw she's in the list a while ago, but I'm not sure if she's still here. If Dr. Chen, you're still in the audience, can you spend a couple minutes to chat a little bit about your idea?
Hello, Amitofo. Sorry, I was not prepared, so I'll just share based on my current understanding. So right now we're living in the age of AI, whether we are aware of that or not. Just the moment when we're talking to Siri, we're already surrounded with AI. And especially living in the Silicon Valley, we're driven or take AI kind of as a religion, thinking that tomorrow is the world of AI. And there are other questions for young people. For example, AI knows more about our music taste or our preferences about movies, or even our schedule, much more than we do. They know our personalities. They know what you'd like to be quote unquote successful in the future if you choose a career, etc. So those are the quote unquote benefits that AI, just a glimpse of benefits that AI could provide to the next generation. However, if we ask the young people, do you know what are your interests? And do you know how you're feeling at the moment? And do you know how much time you spend on your phones, etc.? So those very basic questions, and it seems like they might look very blank in your face. And when we are heavily relying on AI, especially take it as a religion, and the next question is, are they really aware of themselves, of the environment, or the whole universe, etc.? So those are the things I think potentially more important than AI, especially when AI is becoming more and more of a trend. It's important for the next generation to know more about awareness as another kind of intelligence. Yeah, that's just a random sharing. Sorry for any, I was not prepared, so thank you for the opportunity for me to share. Amitofo.
Amitofo, thank you. I thought that your idea was very, very interesting. Anyway, thank you very much, Professor Wang Epstein, for sharing with us your insight about this very complicated world from Buddhist perspective and technology viewpoint. And if there's no further here's a comment. Says, as Professor Yuval said, we humans have been hacked. Very interesting comment, thank you. And so I'm going to give this back to Dama Mas Jingyong, who is in Taipei now, whether he wants to announce next week's talk.
I noticed Professor Zhang Wu is online. Liu, can you unmute him? Let Professor Wu will talk about what he's going to talk next week.
I don't know how to unmute him. Ray, can you help?
Yeah, Liu can do that.
Amitabha. Next week, and we're talking about the propagating of Buddha Dharma in this 21st century. The topics mostly focus on how do we, as Buddhists, propagating Buddha Dharma in this time, in this world of technology. That's pretty much about what I have in mind.
Okay, well, great. We're looking forward to that because I think this is a very important topic, given all the complexity the world is facing today. And so there's an art in propagating Buddha Dharma in terms of, I guess, problem solving, as Ron already pointed out. So we look forward to your talk next week.
Thank you.
Dharma Messiung,
Okay.
would you?
Just want to express my appreciation to Dr. Epstein and to Dr. Ray Ye, and also to Mr. Liu Ray for the technical support. And we have Michael Liu as a translator for tonight's talk. And with that, we'll dedicate marriage. I don't have Bell here with me, so we'll just chant us in Chinese, and people can probably go together, follow together. Yeah. 历次功德，望眼佛净土，常保四重恩，下济三途苦。若有见闻者，悉发菩提心，尽此一报身。众生极乐国。We say have bows, so the Buddhas and first head bow, second bow, third bow, bow in respect the Venerable Master. First bow, second bow, third bow. Amitabha, thank you everyone for your participation.